those two things coincide. So it's sort of that presidential ceremony is one of the first one is of special significance because it's not just the ascendance of the new president, but also the formal recognition of the Constitution as the law of the land. It becomes the law on that day. All right. So President Washington comes back out of retirement, the great man, the what some people call the indispensable American. Right. This person who is unique in our history because I'm not sure that we would have a history of a nation without him. Right, it was our leader in war, now our leader in peace. And I think maybe if you had a time machine, you could talk to old George. I think he probably would have said that fighting the revolution was easier than trying to hold the country together in the early republic. So we've gone through this long period of time now where we've escaped the British, so to speak. But because of that, we are no longer a part of the largest economic empire in the world at that time. The British have closed their ports to us. We're not trading with us. They're like, fine, be independent and see how well that goes for you. And they're figuring that within a few years we come crawling back. George Washington assumes the presidency because he was a true believer in the United States of America. He wore himself out for the cause of it, and he's an older man now. Though really, he's not terribly old. He's just in his late 50s when he becomes the president. He's 66 when he dies. So he's in his but those were hard years, the Revolution years, and all these other sorts of things. But without him, there's zero chance of this thing holding together because the sectional rivalries had already started springing up within our society. People's differences of opinions, the beginnings of basically every political fight we still have.
Did you say sectional?
Yes, okay. Like between north, south, the emerging west, especially as the country is rapidly moving west. New states west of the Appalachian Mountains will start to rapidly become important, much more important to the country. People kind of start forgetting the original 13. We still kind of some of those original 13 we still forget, like Delaware. Anybody ever been there? Anybody sure it's there? I don't know. Whatever, right? It becomes they become less important to the narrative, and then people kind of get their back up about that. So Washington's having to hold all this together. The only thing, it seems like, when he becomes the president, the only thing that we can all agree on is that George Washington's the guy that we all want to be president. Right? He remains the only president to ever win the Electoral College unanimously. That does not mean he wins the popular vote unanimously, especially in his second term. But but he's the guy. He's the great hero. He's the father of the nation. And so he comes along, and now he's faced with a mess, right? So Washington's presidency is notable not only because it's the model for how the presidency works. Every president after him has to be judged on the rubric of George Washington, like that, no pressure, You've got that, but also the model for how a president deals with periods of crisis. So Washington, the first thing he comes in, Washington's one of these rare guys who understands that he's not always the smartest guy in the room. He can admit that as great a man as he is, and as people, and he has his ego, just like anybody else, he understands he's not the smartest guy around, but he knew the smartest guys around. And so he says, I'll get all those guys together, and I'll get them to give me advice, and I'm going to put them on a permanent retainer, and of course that's what he does, and that's how he forms the cabinet. So the president's cabinet is not a constitutional creation, it's a creation of George Washington. Our government works on the principle of the unitary executive. We have one. The all executive authority is ultimately vested in the President of the United States. Right? So if something bad happens, or something good happens, the president gets the credit, or the president takes the blame, whether they really deserved it or not. That's the role, that's the job you step into when you take that, when you take the big chair. So everybody's looking at Washington to make it better, and when things don't work, they even turn on George Washington. That's the nature of the job. Right? You hear people sometimes in politics whine, you're mean to my guy, or you're mean to the other guy, or you were mean to my guy and not mean to it. It's nonsense. Right? That's the job. Right? That's how it goes. George Washington himself had to live with that. Now he's got to face two real problems. He's got one big problem domestically and one big problem in terms of foreign policy. In terms of foreign policy, he's trying to avoid another war. America does not want to be in another war. The problem is the British and the French get into wars with each other every 5 minutes, and they keep trying to drag us into it. And the French are going to say to old George, they say, hey, George, remember during your revolution when we backed you up? Well, now we're calling you out on that, and we expect you to back us up. This is now the time period of the French Revolution. We expect you to do your part and to help France. The revolutionary government of France is fighting the British. And George Washington says, we're not getting involved in that. The official position of the United States is neutrality. We had an arrangement with the King of France, and when you chopped his head off, you ended the contract. Right? That was the end of it. We have no treaty with the Republic of France. We had one with the King of France. Right? That's his legal support for why he is gonna does this. And the weight of Washington. Right? Washington is not just famous in America; he's famous around the world. Mary Wollstonecraft, in Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1794, calls him the perfect example of a man. Right? Like the guy who just kicked her country's ass in war. That's pretty tough, man. You imagine there's a lot of British dudes like, man, are you kidding me? You know, but whatever. I mean, Washington, the prestige of Washington, his integrity. People know that George Washington's a man of his word. He says this. He says, we're not going to get involved in that. We're not aiding one side or the other. Both sides kind of take him at his word. John Adams won't have as easy a time because he's not George Washington. Right? So that's how he's going to have to kind of deal with. He's going to have to really kind of push this neutrality thing. One of the things he mentioned, two things he mentions in his farewell address. Avoid those entangling alliances and don't divide yourself into political parties. We ignore both of those things consistently. Right? So this is sort of the thing he says. The other big problem he has in terms of domestic policy is the fact that the country is broke. I mean, broke. Broke would be an improvement because broke just implies no money. We're about $40 million in the hole. There's a lot of money at that time. So George Washington has in his foreign policy, he got his for Secretary of State, he got the best diplomat in the country at the time, Thomas Jefferson, to kind of be his guy who negotiates with France. So he says, well, in terms of money, he looks around, he looks for the smartest guy he knows on money, finds Alexander Hamilton and makes him his Secretary of the Treasury. So Hamilton says, excuse me, don't worry, George, I got you. I got a plan. So he goes off and he comes back and George says, what are we going to do? Because the question is, how are we going to pay off this national debt? And the wisdom at the time, Washington's other advisors, Jefferson and all these other, and Henry Knox and these other people who were in his cabinet, say to President Washington, you know, maybe we owe a bunch of money to the French and the Dutch. If we owe them, maybe we'll get them to take less money. We'll renegotiate. We'll pay 50 cents on the dollar. We'll do these sorts of things, right? And it's not ideal, and you know, like it won't be very honorable, but we get out from underneath of this debt. Hamilton says, hell no, we're not going to do that, right? He says we're going to pay our bills dollar for dollar. And this, but the states all have these debts too. It's not just the federal government. He goes, I know, and we're going to assume that debt too. So he's going to overnight he doubles the size of the American debt. Right? It's insanity, and Jefferson almost resigns right then over it. Ultimately, it will be why Jefferson leaves after Washington's first term, because to ordinary people, Hamilton's financial plan, ordinary economics, Hamilton's financial plan doesn't make sense. In terms of economics, it's the bedrock for the entire global economy to this day. Right? Alexander Hamilton lays out that he does this. In my classes, I refer to him as sort of like, he's like Batman. Right? You know, like you ever watch Batman? He's always like 3 steps ahead of the bad guys. You're beaten, you don't even know it, because he's already figured out all the angles. That's Alexander Hamilton. Because here's what he does: he takes that debt, and then he says, Washington says, you know, what are we going to do with all this debt? We got all this debt now. He goes, this is insane. He goes, what are you going to do with it? He goes, I'm going to sell it. What? How do you sell debt? You know, you're like, is this a Ponzi scheme? What is happening here? I don't know. Maybe it is. If you want to think about it that way. Hamilton says, here's what we're going to do. He goes, we're going to issue treasury bonds, because that's what you're buying when you buy a savings bond or a treasury bill. What you're buying is American debt. So what the American government is saying is if you buy a savings bond today for $20, you buy it for the face value. 15 years from now, whenever it is, whatever the period on it is, it will mature. And interest will have accumulated. So you'll get your $20 back plus a little bit of interest. So in the short term, the government gets the money it needs to pay its bills. In the long term, you make a little money on your investment. And as long as you keep people in that system, it works just fine. Right? You're always kind of borrowing against tomorrow to pay for today. Right? This is Hamilton's financial plan. It's the foundation of the entire global economy, not just the American economy. Right? Here's why it works. Hamilton understands that people will buy into this thing. He understands that, like the rich people in America at that time, he was really trying to get the wealthy to buy into this whole America thing, because they're holding their money offshore and accounts. They're not really all in on America. So to get them all in, he says, they're going to see an opportunity to make money, and when they buy in, I got you. Because now you have to care because if you're bought in, now you have to care that America succeeds. Right? You have to do everything in your power to make sure the government works, to make sure that the system works, and that there is a United States to pay you your money back when it comes time to get it. What he is selling is the full faith and credit of the United States government. The United States of America always, always, always pays its bills, and we pay dollar for dollar. Right? Now, we may not pay in money. Sometimes it's in foreign aid. Sometimes it's in, hey, we showed up France when the Nazis rolled in. Right? It's those sorts of, but we always pay up. Right? Everything is based on that. That's why the dollar is the currency of comparison everywhere in the world. Right? It's why our money has no actual value in gold. People talk about gold reserves. None of that means anything. Gold's just metal. You can't eat it. It doesn't feed you. It doesn't keep you warm at night. Money is just paper, right? What that money represents is the full faith and credit of the United States of America. And if people lose that, well, then the whole world's falling apart anyway. And none of that really matters. It's road warrior time. You know, that's what Hamilton understands. He in the 1790s, he lays the framework for American global economic superpowerdom, if that's a word. That's what he's doing. He sees the future. And nobody yet. You see, it's backwards.
I don't want to pay faith to go to college. Stupid.
Thank you, Hunter. Right? But that's how it works. It's sort of a lie we all agree to. And it's really Hamilton's genius or lunacy or whatever. Now, at this time, we're also violating Washington's wisdom about political parties, and this is where the first American political parties are going to start to creep in, and you'll see them forming in Washington's cabinet. Washington could be above that fray, right? If you had somebody who was as universally loved as Washington now, I guess they'd have to be an independent or something. You know, people on both parties could like them or whatever, would like that person equally. That was what Washington could do, right? Because being the father of the country and all that. But in his cabinet, you start to see the political divide start to happen between Hamilton and Jefferson. Ultimately, Hamilton and the people who sort of adhere to his sort of philosophy of a strong central government and a business-oriented society and all these other sorts of things that you talked about in your class, they become the Federalists, right? And then people who sort of gravitate towards Thomas Jefferson and his idea of an agricultural society and limited federal power and all these other sorts of things that are Jeffersonian principles become what we call on here the Democratic Republicans, or what I mentioned the other day, your book just calls Republicans. Right? It's a super confusing thing because Jefferson's people are referred to in different sources as Democrats, Republicans, Democratic Republicans, Jeffersonian Republicans, Jeffersonian Democrats. Nothing to do with either of the two modern political parties. Those are formed a generation or two later. Right? It's a very confusing thing to try to understand. Now, all of that is working well enough as long as George Washington is the guy in the big chair. Not the Oval Office. He never occupies the White House. John Adams is the first president to do that. Right? So so Washington leaves after 2 terms. Right? He knew he was in ill health, and the wisdom of Washington was don't die in office. If you die in office, the presidency becomes a lifetime job. You set that precedent. Right? No one will violate that precedent until Franklin Roosevelt, and then we, of course, put it in the Constitution after that. That if it's the wisdom of Washington, 2 terms is 2 terms. That's why the president can only have 2. No matter what else happens, the president gets 2. That's it. big, huge asteroids, you know, flying towards the Earth. Too bad. Two terms. We got to wait for the new guy to see what he's going to do. That's how it works. Right? That's the Constitution now. Back then it was custom because it was what Washington did. So John Adams, in 1796, the parties line up. Alexander Hamilton was too divisive of a figure to run for office, run for the presidency at least. He was a senator. Run for the presidency outright. And so John Adams becomes the Federalist nominee, and Thomas Jefferson becomes the Democratic Republican. Right? They fight it out, and it's a particularly dirty campaign. It's the first time you've really had a serious contest for the presidency. They're really, really, really ugly to each other. Adams wins narrowly. But the way the Constitution worked at that time, the president and the vice president were not a unified ticket. So the winner becomes the president, the loser becomes the vice president. So now Jefferson, now they've just had this really dirty fight. You know, in 2016, imagine if Donald Trump had become the president and Hillary Clinton were the vice president. That would be the equivalent. They just had fought a particularly nasty campaign, said all kinds of ugly things about each other. They had nothing on 1796. Okay? There was all kinds of allegations against Adams's wife, and against Jefferson and his relationship with Sally Hemings, and all these other sorts of things. These things came up, right? So Adams becomes the president. Jefferson goes home to Monticello as vice president, starts writing dirty letters in the newspaper about the new government under an assumed name. Like, they didn't always just get along. That wasn't we sort of lionized the founding fathers. They could be just as nasty and political as anybody else, right? So he's writing dirty letters about this whole sort of thing, and Adams is left with this mess, because now here's a government that really only worked really on the greatness of Washington, and he ain't Washington. He's a short, pudgy little dude that nobody really likes. He's kind of obnoxious, whatever. So he comes along. The French start pushing again. They're like, well, Washington's gone. We'll see if this Adams guy will hang with this, will hang with this neutrality. The French want us to join a war with them. The British want us to get in on their side because they know that Adams kind of favors the British anyway. The Federalists tended to. So both sides are kind of pushing. There's this thing. So Adams is like, well, we're going to send representatives to London and to Paris to kind of negotiate neutrality. So he'll send a delegation of American diplomats to Paris, and they'll get there, and basically what happens in the sort of the chaos of the French government says, hey, if you want to, he goes, well, we can't introduce you to, the heads of state, but if you will pay us some money, we'll introduce you to this guy. And that guy says, pay me some money, I'll introduce you to this guy. You don't bribe your way. If people take you seriously as a country, you don't have to bribe your way into talking to someone. If the American ambassador goes to Moscow, right, to visit with the Russian government, or goes to China, or goes to anywhere in the world, like, hey, that's the representative of the American government, there's a degree of respect afforded that. Right? If you have to pay a bribe, nobody's really taking you seriously. People are outraged by this. They call this, comes to be called the XYZ affair. So they say, so people kind of start hollering, the Federalists, Adams' own party, start saying, you can't let them treat us like this. You have to push back on this, and we have to prepare for war. So Adams doesn't really want to have a war with the French, right? But there are already American ships and French ships shooting at each other on the high seas. We call this the quasi-war. It's sort of a war, but not really. Right? And they're saying, you got to declare war and declare an alliance with the British. And Adams breaks with his own party on this, because Washington said neutrality, that meant neutrality, and he knew that we were just this little bitty country. We can't fight a country like the British, like Great Britain or France. We don't have the military might to do that. And so he pushes for neutrality. Now the Democratic Republicans, Jefferson's party, hate him already because he's the opposition party. Now his own party hates him because he turned on them. So that tells you about how well he's going to do for re-election in 1800. Right? He won't even finish in the top 3 in 1800. Jefferson will run again, and he will he'll run against Adams is in the mix, and there's one other Federalist who can't remember, and another Democratic Republican named Aaron Burr. Jefferson and Burr are from the same party, right? And so they're like, well, one will be if they both win, they're going to do. Everybody can see that the Democratic Republicans are going to do real well in 1800. Well, one of Jefferson will be the president, and Burr will be the vice president. Is what everybody assumes. But they get the exact same number of electoral votes, and they both cross the line, the necessary number that you need to win. So it's a question of, well, who's the president, who's the vice president? And Burr's like, well, wait a minute, I got as many as him, I should be the president. And Jefferson is like, yeah, but I'm Thomas Jefferson, and I wrote the frickin' Declaration of Independence, and you're a scumbag, Aaron Burr, you know? I'm maybe paraphrasing here. Right? So it goes to the House of Representatives. Now the House of because that's how we decide that sort of a thing. The House of Representatives is still controlled by the Federalists in their lame duck period. They're on their way out the door. So Hamilton is the head of the Federalist Party. He's in the Senate, and so all these House Federalists, they say to Hamilton, hey, what are we going to do? Who's going to be the president? And Hamilton, turns out, he hates Thomas Jefferson a lot. Everybody knows this. But the only person he hates more than that is Aaron Burr. This is a three-way hatred for these three guys. They absolutely hate each other, all of them. And Hamilton says, if it were me, I would choose Jefferson. I don't agree with the man's principles, but at least he has some. Right? And he says this publicly. Now, Aaron Burr is like, well, you've impugned my honor, bro. You know? And there's already kind of this animosity building between the two. So Jefferson, Hamilton's arch nemesis, you know, becomes president over his other arch nemesis, Aaron Burr. Now, Aaron Burr's not going to let that go. He's the vice president of the United States. He's also a scumbag and a liar. Time will go by. This kind of thing will fester, and he will challenge Alexander Hamilton to a Burr. Or Aaron Burr will challenge Alexander Hamilton to a duel. We know that relationship ends in a bang. Thank you for that pity laugh. Right? Jefferson is cleared of both of his chief political rivals very conveniently. Right? The guy who wins that duel is Thomas Jefferson. Because Aaron Burr puts a bullet in the Federalist Party. Without Alexander Hamilton, there is no more Federalist Party. And now Aaron Burr has murdered, he's the Vice President of the United States, and he's murdered an American senator. So he's forced to flee the country.
Didn't he flee west and then try to
start his own country like Burland or something? out in Louisiana or someplace. He'll get caught. He'll be charged with treason. In fact, it'll be his trial that will cause us to legally define what treason is. There is a very specific legal definition for it. Thanks to Aaron Burr, that's his contribution to America. And why this isn't a movie, I don't know, because it's great. It's got everything, violence and smut and everything. Right? So all of this has happened. Now Jefferson's the president, right? Now this is the beginning of this thing that we call the Virginia dynasty. Because Jefferson serves 2 full terms, he's followed by Madison, his Secretary of State, who served 2 full terms. Madison is followed by his Secretary of State, Monroe, who serves 2 full terms. So for a period of a quarter of a century, you have Thomas Jefferson and his protégés in the White House. And that's why those Jeffersonian ideals start to become enshrined. Jefferson really, it's overly cynical to think that Jefferson doesn't believe his ideology. He can be as politically scumbaggy as anybody else, but he believes in certain principles, right? This idea of limited government and all these other the things that he writes in the Declaration of Independence, it turns out he actually means them. And so that's going to become the nature of that. So Jefferson's there, kind of guiding the country, right? Trying to create this agrarian utopia that doesn't happen because the Industrial Revolution. Long story short, the Industrial Revolution will happen. Spoilers, and that's going to change the whole equation. We have too many natural resources and opportunities for economic advance in this country for industry not to take hold here. That was not what Jefferson envisioned, but that's not always how things go, right? How you want. He leaves in 1808. He's replaced by James Madison. Now Madison finds himself, again, another one of these guys who's really, really important. What's his most notable achievement before being the president? Anybody remember? It's kind of a big one.
Wait, here, Madison?
Yeah.
This is the infrastructure plan.
Right. He's also the author of a very important document, primary author of a very important document, Constitution of the United States. Right.
Oh,
right. It's a very big one.
Bill of Rights. That one specifically, isn't it? Wasn't it like Madison?
Madison had a hand in the Bill of Rights, yes. But the Constitution, the structure of the Constitution, he writes most of it. He's the kind of guy. So he's this kind of guy. He's kind of bookish and he's this intellectual, whatever. But he's a little bitty dude. He's about 5'4". He's not this. He's not this larger than life figure like Washington or Jefferson. He's just kind of quietly competent. But by 1812, America's forgotten the rule of its revolution, right? And there's this question like, we need to fight with the British over Canada and territories in the West, right? That's how we're going to get the War of 1812. American history's single best example of, right? We sort of do that. We fight a war for a couple of years. At the end of it, both sides go, hey, sorry about that. we back up from that. It's the last time we'll ever fight the British. There's never really serious question of animosity between the Americans and the British. Like, we had to get it out of our system or something, right? They burned the White House. That's how it turned into the White House, because they whitewashed it after they burned it. They invade Washington, D.C. There were some ships fight. Nothing really happens. Andrew Jackson makes a name for himself in a battle that didn't matter, right? Because the war was already over before the Battle of New Orleans. Right? All these other kinds of things happen. What's really happening in that period of the 18 teens, in this period this period of the Virginia dynasty, is America solidifying its place. Like, here's where we stand on things. Here's where we are. We don't want to be drug into your things. We're really going to double down on this idea that we don't want to be involved in your foreign conflicts. Right? The president that follows President Madison, President Monroe, will most famously solidify that in the thing called the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine says to the old European powers, basically, stay the hell out of the Western Hemisphere. Keep your old world problems in the old world. We're doing something different here. We're forming representative governments. We're doing democracy. Don't come over here. We can't, in no way can we enforce that in 1823 when he issues this thing. But that's really what he's saying. That's really the thing that's happening. And for the most part, the European nations have their own issues, and they're fighting each other. This is the post-Napoleonic era, so they're trying to put themselves back together and restructure. So they do leave us alone. So this allows us this long period of internal development where we can move west. We can develop our economy, this thing that we call the national system, roads and bridges and infrastructure, and the growth of an industrialized economy and rapid westward expansion and all the good that comes with that and all the bad that comes with that too. All of that's happening, and we don't have to be bothered with the Europeans too terribly much. And then, of course, it won't be really again until like the 1880s, the late 1880s, where America reemerges onto the world stage after a couple of generations where we're really able to focus on our own westward expansion. Right? All of that is created by this, like, Washington saying neutrality, and we're not getting involved in European wars, and the presidents who follow him being smart enough to to heed his wisdom. Right? That's why George Washington matters. If you really want to, that's why I spend more time on that than anything else. That's the, as far as presidents go, he's the model for the presidency, and for that kind of wisdom, at least in that day and age. It won't be until Theodore Roosevelt that anybody will seriously question the wisdom of that that neutrality and that what we might have called back then isolationism, though that's not entirely precise. You may have questions about that? Okay. If you have any individual questions, I'd be happy to ask them. If not, you are paroled until Thursday when we'll talk about Jackson.